I'm Christy Bishop, and you're listening to the What Nobody Tells Us podcast. Each week, I'll be exploring a topic that's often stigmatized, misunderstood, or simply left unaddressed. And we're going to be shedding light on the things that nobody tells us, but that everyone should know. Let's get started. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. This is a topic that I have been really wanting to find an expert in, and simply because I find it fascinating. The world is changing all around us, and I simply am not that expert. And the topic is men's mental health and how our society has really failed men and the evolving role of masculinity overall. So think about it this way. Again, I turned 45 just a few weeks ago. I shared my birthday on the podcast, but let's think about a man in his 40s. He might be successful in his career, but feeling completely empty and disconnected inside. Or think about someone a little bit younger who might be a young father who wants to be more present for his kids, but he's struggling to break out of the idea of that the fact that he has to be a provider. I'll use air quotes. Or think about, let's go even younger. Think about a teenager who's been bottling up their emotions because he's been told that real men don't cry. And then let's go to someone like Tessa's age, 7.5, almost 8. A little boy who gets upset and is told to stop crying, go to his room, and basically push down all of the emotions so they become repressed. So he has no idea how to actually feel and process his emotions. So these are not isolated cases, but they do have one thing in common. They are representing what I keep hearing about and what I'm going to call a crisis of masculinity. I'm sure you've seen a lot of headlines. There are rising rates of male suicide and depression, along with teenage girl suicide and depression, increased substance use, and a growing idea that men are starting to feel purposeless. This is a sign that things are evolving. This is a sign that we need to redefine how men contribute in our society and how they're actually able to show up in a full holistic way, not in the way that previous generations have boxed them in and forced them to be, particularly emotionally. So when I talk about those boxes, I really think about things like rigid stereotypes of that stoic provider or the fearless protector or the unemotional rock, that men feel like they have to be. And we've told them to suppress their feelings and to man up, not be vulnerable. And sadly, society and a lot of families out there who did the best with what they have and what they knew, they raised little boys to turn into teenage boys, to turn into men who do not have the tools to navigate a landscape of emotion or changing gender roles or expectations overall. So think about it this way. Do you know a man in your life who struggles to express their emotions? Like, do you know men who find it hard to ask for help when they're struggling or they don't say a word? What about, do you know a man who, a friend or family member who might feel a little bit lost right now, career-wise, family-wise, emotion-wise, or just who they are? So today we're exploring that. And my guest is by the name of Lee Povey, and he is a former professional cyclist from the UK. He was a coach for the USA Olympic cycling team, and he actually started coaching men and developed men's groups. He not only coaches startup founders in terms of how to scale their business and coaches them individually throughout their teams to understand themselves holistically and how they can contribute to the business and build the business. But on the flip side of that, he coaches everyday men individually and in groups about how they can navigate this changing definition of masculinity. So if you want to support a man in your life, if you want to better understand what's going on right now, which is exactly what I want to do, this conversation really helps do that. And the thing that I found so amazing about Lee is that he really talks about specific strategies for men to connect with their emotions, to build meaningful relationships, and then honestly, most importantly, to redefine what it means to be a man on their own terms. And that means embracing vulnerability as a strength. I mean, my husband, God bless, he's the exact opposite of this. Like, he cries like 3 times a day, mostly watching weird movies that his Film Vault listeners have assigned to him. I just look over and he's sobbing. I'm like, oh my God, again? I promise I'm supportive. It's just like crazy. So this conversation really, really, really puts some light on what's going on and how we can help the men in our lives, and how we can raise, I mean, I don't have a son, but how we can raise our little boys and our sons, and turn them into emotionally mature men who can process their emotions, who are there and strong in different ways, but also most importantly, they found themselves. Just like for anyone else, they know exactly who they are and what kind of man they want to be, and it's on their terms. So I hope this helps to start the healing process for a lot of you out there who may have men in your life like this, or men who are listening, because I know there are a fair amount of you. And thank you again for always listening. I hope this helps you too. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Lee Povey. Hi, Lee. Welcome to What Nobody Tells Us.
Hi, good morning, Christy.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to have you because I've realized, and my husband has told me this since he's had the opportunity to, it's like, it's good to have a male perspective on your show.
Oh no. Is this a female-centric show? Am
No,
I going to
I
get
just
booed by
realized,
the audience?
no, God, no, not at all. I've realized I've had so many female guests, but to talk about all semblance of topics, really serious topics, and some lighter fare as well. But one of the things that have come up is you should talk to a man about men's issues. So here we are.
Well, I'm very privileged to be here. And I also love that you have a lot of female guests, because my guess would be that podcasting is fairly male dominant.
Yeah, I think that it is for sure. And we have a lot of very loyal female and male guests too, and male not guests, rather male listeners. So that these difficult topics don't discriminate. So I think that your journey is fascinating, and we'll get into men's groups, and we'll get into kind of the priorities plaguing men today and what we can do about it. But talk a little bit about your background and a bit of your story.
So to give that a bit of colour, I started cycling because it was my dad's sport. So where I come from, Brighton in England, there is the world's oldest velodrome. And it's around 2 cricket pitches. So it's not like a typical velodrome, which if you've seen it on the Olympics, it's the steeply banked wooden track. They're 250 meters around. It's inside a nice stadium. Ours was outdoors around 2 cricket pitches. It had tree stumps in the racing line. It was an experience, and the banking wasn't very high. So I learned to ride there because I went to watch my dad race, and like any young boy, I wanted to do what my dad did, and also, being very competitive, I wanted to beat my dad. I wanted to kill the king. Right, I'm going to beat you. So that was my way of bonding with a man who was sadly highly narcissistic and probably would have been diagnosed as a sociopath. He had little to no empathy for other people, and everything was around him. And of the many children that my dad had, I probably had at some points the closest relationship to him because of that cycling. That's something we shared together. And, I was also a very successful swimmer and rugby player, and he never watched me do either of those once. He was only interested in cycling.
Wow.
So not a big surprise that as a young boy looking for his dad's attention, that I take cycling the most seriously, and that is the one that I then progress onto. So as a youngish man, 17, 18 years old, I was on the GB national team as a junior athlete. Unfortunately, I had a pretty poor coaching experience, which will become relevant a little bit later, where my coach went to the Junior World Championships the year before I was due to go and said, no British person will ever win a medal. The Italians, the Germans, the Russians, they're too big, they're too strong. Bearing in mind, I'm 6'2" and 200 pounds, and I was nearly that size at 17. I'm big for a track sprint cyclist anyway.
Yeah.
So very odd thing for him to say, and really kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. He just was not interested or motivated in helping me be my best. So I realized that I wasn't in that system going to succeed, and I probably wasn't going to become an Olympic champion. And honestly, I don't think I had the talent necessary for that. I was a good national level rider, but not quite international level. So then I went into the workforce. So I went into real estate, and I did corporate real estate for 6 years. And then I had my own company for 6 years. but the cycling bug was always there. And I still raced at a local level, not as seriously as I had when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I got asked to coach a couple of the local kids. There was a new program in the UK called the Talent Team. There was a lot of money being invested in finding young talent, and they really needed more coaches. There wasn't enough coaches to cope with the volume of athletes that they were finding. So I got asked to coach two local kids, both of whom became national champions. I was still working in the real estate business, and at the same time thinking, oh God, I really want to do this. I want to do this coaching thing. This is
Mm-hmm.
fun. So my plan was that I would stay in real estate until I was 50, make all my money, and then become a
The
cycling
plan.
coach, like, for a hobby. Like I'll make my money and I'll be a cycling coach for fun.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Things changed. I went to the European Championships in Germany, 2007. I still remember this day very clearly. One of my athletes was competing. I was sitting in the stand with his dad watching, and I didn't want to go back. I did not want to go back to being a real estate agent. I was like, the moment has passed. I don't want to do it. I got incredibly lucky. I sold that business December 2007. Property crash happened in the UK January of 2008.
Yeah.
So if I'd sold it 1 month, I wouldn't have been able to sell it 1 month late. It would have been worthless. That's
Yeah.
how lucky I got. Then I sat there for 6 months going, well, I think I need to do property development, and I still need to be making lots of money because, money is important. A very wise friend of mine said, why don't you just concentrate on your cycling, have fun, reignite your cycling career? So I went back to kind of a professional level of cycling, won my first national championships, and then suddenly everybody wanted me to coach them. And that's how my professional cycling coaching business was born.
So I want to go back to your dad just for a second. There's so much to unpack there, and we won't spend a lot of time doing it. But when you stopped cycling and you transferred to real estate, what was his reaction?
I was still racing locally, so he could still come and watch me.
Okay.
If you've ever really known a true narcissist or
Yeah.
a true sociopath, they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't really care what you do. He only ever cared as it being a reflection of me. So to give an example, he would come into my real estate office when I wasn't there. He'd sit and talk to my staff, and he would tell them how good I was at sport. But it'd be from the lens of, look at what my genes produced.
Right.
Look how good. And I mean, he would literally say, look how good my sperm is, that is the kid that I've produced. And if I failed, he would say things to me like, oh, I must have had a bad sperm day the day that you were conceived. Yeah. And he never said to me, oh, well done, son. He would always talk about me in front of other people as a vehicle to promote himself.
Right. I was going to ask if there was ever any validation to you about you, but no.
Not that I really remember. No, it was mainly, he wasn't even, it's not like he was mean. He wasn't one of those pushy parents like, you've got to do this. It was just a vehicle for him to say, look how good I am about himself.
A true narcissist.
True narcissist. A proper one. Not, what's popular today is to talk about people as narcissists and to confuse getting likes on social media as somebody being narcissistic. And it's like, there's narcissistic traits, and we all have some kind of need to be liked and loved, and that can spill into some unhealthy traits. And then there's a true narcissist, which means that person has zero ability for empathy. It is all about them, and everything is in relation to them and how they perceive themselves.
Yeah. How did, as you moved into coaching, because coaching requires such compassion and expertise, it's a whole, it depends on the coaching style that one has, but it's a holistic experience, because you're not just dealing with the performance of the athlete and the person you're coaching, you're dealing with the things behind the scenes, whether emotionally, familially, whatever it might be. How did your relationship with your dad, I guess, motivate you in your coaching career? Because it's a complete, obviously you're not a narcissist. Like you said, we all have a little bit of these traits. We can't get away from them completely. But were you motivated to be the opposite of your dad and to make a difference with people?
I was on a podcast last week, and the guy asked me what I'm most proud of in my life. And my answer was not becoming my dad. So at an early-ish age, and I'm trying to think back kind of when exactly, but probably in my early teens, around that kind of moment, the romanticism of my dad being this kind of macho hero, because he was big, strong, He liked getting into fights.
Mm.
There was some kind of stereotypical macho kind of Hollywood kind of vibe to him. He was good
Uh,
looking. Women liked him. That's part of the problem.
yeah.
And the boy in me, as he was becoming more of a man, was like, oh, actually, this is wrong. We're
Yeah.
driving to cycling events and he's trying to have fights because somebody's got too close to us in the car or cut us up, or he's perceived some slight. So every journey with him was stressful. Every bike ride with him was stressful.
Yeah.
So there was a moment when it clicked for me. Oh, this is not what I want for my future, and this is not how I want to be in the world. And my mum's very compassionate. I definitely had a lot of my mum's compassion. So I had to stop and think, well, what do I want to be? And it was a while before I had the emotional capacity to even understand what that meant. I just knew at that point I didn't want to be my dad. I
Yeah.
didn't know what I wanted to be. So then, as a fairly young man, I was seeing an osteopath because I had problems with my back. So osteopath is a chiropractor in the UK. And this guy said to me, look, a lot of your problems are emotional. Like, you're carrying a lot of attention here that, is a bit unusual for a young guy like you. I think you need to see my friend James. And his friend James was a therapist.
Mm.
And I'm like, sure, whatever, buddy. As a young guy in the UK, therapy is
Yes.
not top of mind.
Right.
When I actually started having therapy, I didn't know another guy that was having therapy. I was the only one.
Yeah.
I don't think even any of my female friends were having therapy at the time. We're talking 30 years ago in the UK. It was just not a prevalent thing. So I started having therapy with this guy, which was incredible and awesome. And then he introduced me to men's groups. And that's how I got into going to men's groups, because it was like, I think this would be really useful for you. Because I didn't have any good role models or mentors. A lot of my friends were older than me.
Yeah.
And I think that was subconscious choice of trying to find these good role models.
Like father figures.
Yeah, but they weren't really what I was looking for, right?
Right.
They were still young guys themselves. I was a teenager to my early 20s. These were late 20s to early 30s. They weren't quite the mentors that I was looking for, so I went seeking more of them.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to actually go to therapy after the recommendation? Because again, I traveled to the UK for years and years and years, and this was as recently as 10, 12 years ago. Therapy was not a big thing then even. So I think 30 years ago, what compelled you to actually go?
I've always been very analytical.
Mm.
I enjoy kind of breaking things down. So as a little kid, it was playing with Lego and Meccano, which is like a mechanical version of Lego, and building things and taking things apart. I was terrible for taking all of the electronic equipment in the house apart and getting told off because I was trying to figure out how it worked.
Yeah.
And then that progressed to physiology. Like, how does the human body work? How do I become better as an athlete?
Yeah.
And then it progressed to psychology. How do human beings work? Why do we make the choices we do?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I already thought differently about life than my contemporaries. I was much more analytical about how I was and why I was
Yeah.
than they were. So, the inkling was there, but I think it took about 6 months. I probably saw him another 3 or 4 times. And I think the last time it was like, basically, stop effing about and go and see this guy. It's time.
It's time.
And
It's time.
I took his advice, and I'm incredibly thankful I did. The first session, I just kind of blurted it all out. And, my therapist at the end of the session said, okay, Lee, I think a lot of this is going to be about your dad. And I was like, no, I can't stand that guy. And I haven't cared about him or listened to him since I've been 13, 14. And he just did the thing that therapists do where they kind of shake their head and go, nod their head and go, sure. Okay, buddy. Right. And then 6 months later, I'm like, hey, James, I feel like a lot of this is about my dad. And he just smiles and goes, sure.
Yeah. He's like, let them figure it out. I'll let him figure it out 6 months later. Yeah.
Yes.
So talk to me about your coaching business now. And I'm so curious there's so much talk in the zeitgeist about men's health and men's emotional health. And in the US in particular, and I know you've lived here for over 15 years now, obviously, so it's different than the UK, different than Europe. But I feel like there's this kind of renaissance for men to start really doing what you did 30 years ago and maybe it's the self-selecting sample that I'm around, but some of the men that I know are really starting to ask me questions around like, do you know a good therapist? Hey, do you know a good functional nutritionist? Hey, do you know a good whatever? To try to really take care of themselves in a better way, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of it. So in your coaching business in the men's group, what do you start to do with the men? If you're now the I'll use air quotes, the therapist, what's your approach to working with men today based on everything you've learned?
There's so much to reply from that statement.
I can only
I'm
imagine.
struggling a little bit about where we start. I think the first thing, let's separate my coaching business from the men's work I do. So my coaching business is for founders and their teams, and I work equally with men and women, male and female founders and executives. And then there's my human passion or my societal goodwill of men are struggling and I want to be part of the solution. I don't want to just sit on the sidelines and watch men struggling
Mhm.
and making poor choices. You know, some of the reason that we're seeing fascism rise around the world is because men are struggling in various societies, and their response is to look for an authoritarian leader that's going to, is going to fix it for them, solve
Yeah.
it for them, and put men back on the top of the pile, which is why we're seeing a lot of very anti-woman rules and decisions and laws being put forwards,
Yeah. Yeah.
because men were used to being top of the pile and now they're not necessarily. So if you look at results for boys and young men in schools, they are performing worse than girls are.
Hmm.
So if you track back to the push to get more women to go to university, at that point, it's about 20 to 30% more men were going to university than women. It's completely flipped now. And it's 20 to 30% more women going to university than men. And they're leaving university with better degrees than men are.
Yeah.
So women are now entering the workforce as a higher commodity than men are. They're actually getting a higher starting wage than men are.
Mm.
Obviously, there's a difference when women have children that kind of can be
Yeah.
an issue for their career and puts a hold on their career or stunts their career development. However, they are starting on more money than men are, and they are being more successful in school and in life right
Mhm.
now than men are. And the way I want to look at that is I don't want to be the Andrew Tate of the world. In
Oh
fact, I want to
God.
be the very opposite to Andrew Tate and
Yes.
say it's not about putting women down. It's not about holding women back so men can succeed. It's how can we help everybody succeed? What are we missing with boys and young men at schools that means that they are not succeeding as well as girls were
Yeah.
or girls are? Same at university level, same at the career level. And then another aspect to that is the high rate of suicides in middle-aged men. So
Yeah.
the two biggest suicide groups are teenage girls, which is
Hmm.
very closely linked to online bullying, and then
Yes.
middle-aged men, which is closely linked to divorce. So men are much worse at creating community than women are. They aren't as good at keeping their friendships going. Their marriage ends, their kids are grown, and they're
Yeah.
suddenly incredibly lonely. And this is why middle-aged men are committing suicide on higher and higher
Hmm.
numbers, because they don't have community.
Yeah.
So what I'm looking to do in the world is create community for men so that we can reduce those numbers of suicide and loneliness. Loneliness is a huge epidemic, especially for men.
Yeah.
And also to help men be better prepared. Like,
Mhm.
how do you succeed in the modern world? And men are struggling from the point of view that they don't necessarily know what their role is anymore. You know, we go back to the patriarchal society. It's very simple. Man goes out to work, he earns the money, woman stays at home, looks after their children. You go back to the 70s in America, which was probably the most prosperous time, or at least the time that was easiest for families to be prosperous. A
Mhm.
man could get a job where he could earn enough money that he could support the family. They probably had a car or two, and the wife stayed at home and looked after the kids.
Yeah.
Now, the cost of living is more expensive, especially when it comes to property prices.
Yeah.
And you need usually two people working, at least in some capacity. And so that man isn't feeling the same value in society that he used to feel.
Mhm.
And that's okay. My wife earns as much, if not more money than I do. You know, I'm lucky that we're both very successful. She has her own private therapy business that I support her in, and I love it. I'm not going to lie, I love what that brings us.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see is how do we support men not choose the path of I need to be dominant, I need to put women down to feel better, but feeling okay and comfortable and confident in themselves that they are contributing to their families and to society.
You just mentioned the value in society, and I go also to control. It's very much about if everyone is under your control and there's no questions asked, like your wife stays at home with the children, going back to the kind of the more conservative era and the Handmaid's Tale, which it's, we're seeing the writing on the wall, and it's like we're not going back there, guys. Like we cannot go back there. But a lot of it's about control too, because if no one's going to ask you questions, no one's going to push back on you for anything. You're the one who makes all of the decisions, no matter right or wrong. That people are just used to that, but it's like that's also not reality anymore. In certain microcosms, certainly it is, right? But it feels like there's this wave against that. But obviously in the US, there's this pushback towards it. It's disheartening, to say the least, for women.
Any change in a system is always going to bring some resistance.
Sure.
So, if you're in a group of people and a new person enters a group, the group dynamics change.
Yeah.
And what we're doing here is we've been steadily changing the group dynamics of American society and the rest of Western society,
Yeah.
and prevailing over to really the rest of the world. Like this impact will eventually be felt pretty much everywhere, I imagine. Yeah. And going back to tribal times, things were much more shared in the community. Mm-hmm. And then we got into the industrial age where things changed. And now we're coming out of that into this technological age where your ability to work, your strength, they're irrelevant. Your work capacity and your strength are irrelevant. Not that women are have a much less lower work capacity than men anyway, because they don't. But that kind of strength and also I can fight and protect my family.
Yeah.
It's not needed. Crime is greatly reducing. Violent crime is greatly reducing. Women don't need a man to physically protect them. They don't need men to physically protect them from being taken to the next tribe. Mm-hmm. Like that's all gone. So now we're looking at how do we figure out how we have these more equal relationships, as I think they should be, and how do we support men in feeling valued in that? And I think a lot of it comes down to fear. And the problem for men is we are told at a young age that fear is absolutely the worst thing you can possibly show. Yeah. So if we just look at the development of men and women are encouraged to express themselves emotionally more. Yep. They're not judged as much. I mean, they are in some ways, but not as much as men are for showing their emotions. Is expected. Oh, she's a woman. Right. She's emotional.
We're judged in every other way, but for showing emotion early on, no, we're encouraged to. But then it becomes an albatross later. Yeah.
Yes. But for young men and boys, it's grow up, be tough. Yeah. I got all of this stuff about don't cry.
Don't cry. I was going to say don't cry.
It's a human emotion or a human display of emotion, not human emotion. Crying is a physical display of emotion. So when we're teaching kids that they can't process themselves and their experience as they should be, well, of course, we're setting themselves up for issues later in life when they don't have the tools needed to process through all of these events that are happening to them. And especially fear. If you can't experience fear healthily and you can't share that you're experiencing fear and therefore ask for help, you will make fearful decisions. Well, what do human beings do when they're afraid? They become more controlling. So control is all around and based on fear. So the more fear that somebody is feeling, the more controlling they are likely to become to make themselves feel safe. So of course we're seeing these more controlling actions because men don't feel safe because they don't know what they're really here to do anymore. And especially in their communities when they saw their grandfather and their father behave in a certain way. Yes. And now those opportunities aren't there for them. The manual jobs aren't there for them in the same way that they used to be.
And they're trying to force it back to where it was safe, but it's like that ship has sailed. It's so interesting the way you break it down because it's like repression as a child, leads to fear as an adult, because you literally do not you, but one does not know how to process those emotions and have the tools to do that, to then ask for help, to be like, okay, I can overcome whatever's freaking me out, and I can move through this together with my close community or community at large. So therefore, I try to go back to what's going to make me feel safe and control. It's like the four-step process in all of this, but it's impacting everyone on a global scale, because men still do have, let's be real, the power, in at least in governments, right, where the the majority of decisions are being made. You spoke earlier about,
And
you
not
got,
even that. I just want to be clear. It's not even
yeah,
just a majority of decisions be made. It's the age group of the people making those decisions.
correct,
They don't
yes,
really represent the majority of the populace, because a lot of them are very old and they're making decisions for teenagers, people in their 20s and people in their 30s, whose life is going to be completely different to the people who are making those decisions
it's
and voting
already
on those
totally different.
policies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about, so, thinking about like startup founders, for male and female, that you work with, and you help coach them in terms of, was it Series B? Is that where it is? People have gotten some
So
funding and they kind of
typically,
know.
yeah. So typically, if you come to me, you've been through a few rounds of fundraising.
Yeah,
I'm not cheap. I'm an expensive coach. What I
sure.
do is pretty specialized. So I work at a fairly high rate, and therefore you have to be able to afford me.
Yeah,
And also, you only need somebody like me at a particular stage of your business. So my
right.
specialty is coming in when you have a business that is really taken off. So you have a product or a service that is, there is a good product market fit for it. Your business
Mhm.
is taken off and you are growing rapidly, and you're trying to figure out what your leadership means, how you learn to delegate, teach, coach your team, and how you
Mhm.
set up your executive team and those layers of management for success. And I come in and support the leader with the emotional process. I come and support the team with the skills and the tactical. What does leadership mean? A
Yeah,
lot of the people that I work with haven't necessarily been through a corporate system where they get taught leadership.
exactly.
They're
Yes.
usually borderline geniuses, if not geniuses.
Mhm.
They're so smart that they are creating these things, they're having these ideas, and then at a fairly early age they're stepping into a leadership position,
Mhm.
but they haven't gone through the process that typically leaders go through, where you rise through the ranks and you get a lot of experience of working with people and you get feedback on your leadership. So
Mhm.
we're having to fast track their leadership. And it's not a lack of intelligence by any means. It's just a lack of practice. How much practice
Sure.
have you had of being a leader? How much time have you paid thinking about being a leader, as opposed to how much time are you looking at, how do I make my product better, or how do I make my service better? How do we fit our market better? How do we do our marketing?
Yeah.
And then someone like me comes in and goes, well, if you really want this to succeed, you've got to understand your team. You've got to
Yes.
understand yourself first. And then from there, you know your stuff well enough that you don't allow it to get in the way of your team, and you maximize what you have. And then how do we build this community and the culture in the team? And I support all of that. And I'm a little unusual because I coach multiple people in the same company at the same time, which is
Mhm.
can be tricky.
Yeah, can be very tricky, but as long as it's very, very confidential and they have a safe space in you, you can be very successful with it. I'm curious if you've seen any differences between your male leaders and your female leaders in terms of these kind of the ideation gurus, the ones who keep churning out the ideas but don't necessarily know how to be a leader. Or do you have take different paths with them or have different strategies based on gender?
Typically, no. I like to think of, and this is my approach to my men's groups as well. I like
Hmm.
to think of everybody as an individual human being,
Yeah.
and how do I best support this person being in the world? And I feel if I come with pre notions of this is a female leader, this is what they might be experiencing,
Hmm.
I'm already putting my own judgment on it, rather than just taking this human being and going, okay, where do you need support, and let's focus on that. Then what I can do is then I can empathize and add, yes, other female leaders that I've worked with have been through a similar experience to you.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll put them in touch with each other for mentorship or companionship. And one of the things I'm literally just a bit, well, have launched it, but I'm going to launch a group that goes with it. I've launched a LinkedIn group called the Founders Catalyst, the point
Mm.
of which is to get founders together so that they can share their stories and so that
Yeah.
they can understand each other and they can get support. And then I'm going to launch a 6-month intensive to go with it, which will be a small group, very similar to my men's groups, but be mixed gender, purely for founders. So founders can get together and talk about their particular needs.
That's great.
Yes, there is a difference between being a male founder and a female founder. However, I think also there's just a difference between human beings and the family system they've been through, the schooling system they've been through, the expectations. One of the things I notice, and it took me a while to understand this, is the privilege of being a man.
Hmm.
And that privilege is that men just expect that people will listen to them and are much more likely to take big risks because they've seen so many other men take big risks.
Right. Right. And
They're
be
not
successful.
thinking, I'm trailblazing. The trail has already been blazed.
Yeah.
So, whereas women tend to be thinking more about, like, I might be the first woman doing this. I might
Yes.
be blazing the trail here. And not only am I thinking about what am I doing, but I'm thinking about what is the role model that I'm leaving for everybody else. So, there's an extra element to that for women that there's not necessarily for most men.
Yeah, and an extra element of pressure around that too, and how the product and the company and the role and the brand and the reputation will be perceived. That's the reason I ask if you take a different take is because I've had several executive coaches, not several, probably two or three, over the course of my career, and they've all been white men, and they've all been hired by white men to come in, and they've really come in with preconceived notions around me, particularly as a younger executive when I was in my early 30s with my first coach. And it was like they came in with a real chip on their shoulder about the opportunity that I was getting at a young age because of my career trajectory. And I just thought it's so refreshing to hear your perspective, to say I'm starting with everyone as a human being. Everyone's a blank slate for me, and then I identify, okay, based on our conversations, what the specific needs are, how I can help improve or help to solve any of the issues, and then help them grow. That to me is like kudos to you, because I've had the exact opposite experience, and it's been frustrating to say the least.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that you experienced that, number one. And number two, for anybody listening to this that's thinking about getting a coach or working with a coach, obviously I'm an advocate of the profession. It helped me
Hmm.
enormously, it still helps me. I
Hmm.
still have coaches that I work with personally and friends in the coaching industry that I lean on a lot for support and mentorship. The experience should be that you drive your own work and
Right.
the coach is there to support you. The coach shouldn't be bringing preconceived ideas. The coach should be letting go of their own stuff. So
Hmm.
if I'm showing up in a call and I'm noticing something coming up for me, I will try and note that in the call. So I might say to a client, hey, I want to say something here, and it feels like I want to tell you what to do, or I'm feeling like I want to teach right now. So I'm going to take my coaching hat off and I'm going to
Hmm.
share what is going on for me. And let's explore how it feels for you. And is this beneficial to you? Is it not? Is this my stuff, or am I noticing something? And
Yeah.
I really name when I think it could be my stuff and I might be completely off base.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love it when my clients will say to me, when I share something with my clients and they'll say, no, that's not right for me. Great. Now I
Yeah.
know what isn't right for you. That's
Yeah.
just as useful as knowing what is right for you. So, yeah, I think it's easy to become a coach.
Hmm.
And to be a really good coach, you have to have done your work so you know
Exactly.
what your triggers are,
Yeah.
right? You've got to know what are the things, or activators. I don't really like triggers in this term. What's the things that's going to activate you? It's going to
Hmm.
activate your envy, which is going to activate your greed, which is going to activate your fear.
Yeah.
So that when that happens, you can put it to one side and go, that's not serving this person right now. That's my stuff. Let's put
Yes.
it over there. I'll go talk to my therapist, or, in my case, my wife, or, one of my coaching colleagues, do a consultation, figure out what's going on for me, but I'm not going to allow it to become part of the room.
Yeah. How do you start to work through the when a client of yours, and specifically male clients, when they get activated, and that's a great word, or triggered, how do you start to work through some of those in the events that, going back to the kind of repress, fear, control model, if they haven't had any of the upbringing or community or training or opportunity to express themselves in a healthy way, do they reject conversations around being more compassionate, about being more open? Like, what's your approach to starting that with someone who's never had any of this kind of more progressive thinking?
Look, if you're employing a coach, you have some understanding that you want things to be different, whatever they are. Whether you
Right.
think it's the skill set and it needs to change, your emotional approach, all of it, you're looking for a mentor. There's a reason why you're coming to a coach for support. So if we go right back to the beginning of this conversation, highly narcissistic people don't seek out therapists or coaches
Right.
because they don't want anything that challenges their worldview of them being perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm already working with people that have some inkling and some iota of like, I'm a human being and how do I want to be better, and some self-reflection.
Yeah.
And typically the people I work with are likely to have done some kind of self-development, have worked with a therapist or maybe even a coach before. So there is some work there usually before I get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're looking to take it to a whole nother level is my hope when I get involved with these people. What I like to do is I start with, what are emotions? Why do we have them?
Mm.
And especially for the very kind of logical thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
I talk about, well, what's the function of these? What's the biological, evolutionary function of emotions? What do they
Mm.
do for us? Why does our body go through this process? Why do our minds go through this process? And I find that gets a lot more buy-in. Just the same as with athletes. If I was saying, right, this is the way we're going to train, if
Right.
I explained the physiology or the mechanics or the aerodynamics of why we were doing a particular thing, I
Yeah.
got a lot more buy-in rather than, well, this is just how it's done. So
Right.
I start with explaining what it is, why it is, how this impacts us, how we might have made emotional adaptations from our family system. So we get born with certain genetic personality traits. Any parent knows this because their kids are different, yet they come from the same genetic matter. So we get born with specific personality traits. We enter the world, and then our family system, our school system, our societal system, depending on where we're born, meets all of these genetic traits and gives us feedback on them.
Yeah.
And that feedback can be helpful, it can be neutral, it can be negative. And as a little kid, all we're looking to do is to be seen, recognized, loved, appreciated. And that feedback will affect how we feel about ourselves. And then we will make adaptive behavior. So, what is the adaptive behavior I'm taking on? When people get to me, part of my job is to unpeel the adaptive behavior, reflect it back to them, and go, well, you're not in your family system anymore. You're an adult now. The
Mm-hmm.
world that you're in now is not the same as your family system. How would you like to show up in this world?
Yeah.
So, it's a mix of that kind of teaching so that people buy into why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm not at all woo-woo-y. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not I'm not, sending crystals to my clients. I'm not talking about moon charts.
Yeah.
I'm right here. This is based in neuroscience. This is based in physiology. This is based in biology. This is based in
Yeah.
evolutionary science. This is why we as humans understand that these things happen and why they matter. And
Mm-hmm.
here's what you can choose to do from this.
Mm-hmm.
So getting that really helps to start with, so that they understand, how does my brain work? Why am I doing the things I'm doing? How does my brain work?
Yeah.
Globally, like humans, and then now individually, what is your genetic personality trait? We established that. And then what is the adaptive mechanisms that you've taken on to get through to this stage of your life that you can probably let go of? And then reflecting that to them and them going, okay, that's why I choose to do this in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how would you like to be instead? You get to choose now. You don't have to keep behaving the way that you've always behaved. You get
Yeah.
choice. Once it becomes conscious, once you are cognitively aware, you can go, oh, I don't have to behave in that way.
Yeah.
That's not predetermined.
What are the biggest, can you share some of the biggest aha moments that some of your clients have had? Because starting with that objective lens of just, this is the why, this is the what, this is the how, for most it's indisputable, right? And it's not weighted down with anything that someone could argue against or that would make them defensive or activated right away. but the notion of just, you get to choose now. Like you said, you're a grown up. This is, your society is different than it was as you were when you were a child. You're not surrounded by those same people. You get to make a decision. Is that an aha moment for some of them? And like, what are some of the other aha moments that your clients have had?
I'm going to answer that, but just first, I want to address one thing you said that I probably should have been clearer to is, you can be different in your family system as well.
Sure.
You don't have to carry on behaving in the same role as your family system if it doesn't serve you anymore.
Right.
So
Yes.
there's
That's
a
huge.
wonderful book. I think it's children of emotionally immature parents or adults of emotionally immature parents, something like that. Can't remember the title exactly. Wonderful book that goes into what happens when we as children are put in charge of our parents' emotional well-being, which is obviously not what should happen. Should the opposite. Children should never be responsible for their parents' well-being.
Yeah.
So that has an impact. And there's been a whole group of people where their parents have made them responsible for their emotional well-being. Like, don't do that. That upsets me. You can't go and try this because if you get hurt, well, then I'll be upset. And putting their emotional well-being on their child is obviously not helpful for the child, and it causes a lot of adaptive behaviors.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, not only are we uncovering how you show up in the world now, but there's going to be some ramifications. Oh, okay, this is why I take the role I have in my family. Do I even want to do that anymore? And how do I learn how to put boundaries in place? And how do I learn how to function more happily in my own family system? Yeah. So I just want to be clear on that. And then I think the biggest thing for people, and I don't want to give necessarily specifics, I think globally, the biggest thing for people is realizing that they have choice. A lot of people, when they come to me, they're looking to improve, but they don't realize how much ability they have to behave differently. And they don't realize how much of their behavior isn't necessarily set. It's not necessarily biological. It's adaptive mechanisms that society, family systems, their own choices have led to. And now they can do it differently. And then the other thing that goes with it, which is why my engagements aren't just for a few weeks, is because that change takes time. Yes. If you've been doing something for 20, 30, 40 years, you're not going to undo that in a few weeks. That might take, I'm still working on my stuff nearly 30 years after starting therapy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a very different man than I was before, though, right? And I have different outcomes in my lives and different relationships because of it.
Yeah. I mean, we all, it's like shedding skin as a snake, or molting. Well, I mean, we have the opportunity to do that, but I think it's so astute what you're saying, that so few people realize that they're actually in control of their own life. Like they alone are completely responsible for what happens in their life and the changes that they're able to make and the decisions to not make those changes for whatever reasons, right? I want to go back really quickly to what you said about the children of emotionally mature parents, which is a fabulous, fabulous book. It's incredible. Couldn't agree more, recommend it more. But I said something to a friend the other day who was really struggling with their parent, like the child's grandparent, because of the, conditioning that they have and being emotionally mature. And I said to my friend, I was like, the most important thing you can say to your kid right now, because the grandma was a lot of guilt on the kid, like, why don't you X? You're making grandma feel Y. Why aren't you giving me the hug? All of the things. I said, the number one thing you need to say to your child is, it is not your responsibility to make grandma happy. Like, grandma's happiness is not dependent on you. And I just saw this like light bulb go off in her face. And she was like, because she didn't even know that was true for herself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it was like, you can change that. You have the ability to change that for yourself. And you certainly have the ability to change it for your kid. Grandma's not going to like it one bit at all. But everyone's been placating grandma this whole time, or grandpa, or whatever it is. But you can stop that cycle. And I think the ability of choice, to your point, it's so important that people know that they can make a change.
Yeah. And I think of it exactly the same as I think of physical training. Mm-hmm. So you want to improve your cognitive function, your emotional well-being. Well, you have to put the same effort into that as you would do into lifting weights, going running, going for bike rides. And the progress is similar. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tease my wife now. She's just started running.
Oh boy.
And she's like, I've been running for, I don't know how long, 6 weeks, something like that. Why don't I look different? I'm like, well, it's going to take a little bit longer than 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to take some time. Keep
Right?
at it.
You know,
Keep at it.
right
Yeah.
now you're just learning how to do it. You're not even having a huge impact on yourself because you can't run for long enough to really like
Yeah.
make a big impact. So you're in the beginner stage of it before you
Yeah.
get to the more impactful stage of it.
Yeah.
So I think often, and this is where working with a coach or a therapist can be really helpful, is I think often people expect quick changes
Yeah. Instant
and
gratification.
we overestimate how quickly we can have changes and we underestimate the impact that we can make if we can consistently do things for long periods of time.
Yeah.
So if you are consistently doing things well over a long period of time, the change is enormous. But most of these changes are not like night and day.
Yeah.
And some will be, there will be some things like you sharing with your friend, hey, you're not responsible
Mm-hmm.
for mum's well-being, and your kid is not responsible for your mum's well-being. And sometimes you have those moments, and I have them with clients, and we call those breakthroughs, where something shifts like that, and now the world can never be the same again because it clicked in your brain, and your brain goes, oh,
Yes.
I never need to be like that again. And there'll be numerous shifts like that as you're doing the work. There'll be numerous shifts for me. The shift of saying to the therapist, oh, okay, yes, a lot of this is in relation to my dad, whether it be what I learned from him, the role modeling, what I'm having to unlearn, my own particular relationship with him. It's all these different things added together. That man has had a big influence on my life.
Yeah.
Now, I'm thankful. Because he was such a crappy parent, I'm a wonderful human.
Right.
But it took that and me realizing that for me to do the work necessary.
And took 30 years and continues, right? It's an ongoing process, like you said.
I don't see it as ending.
Right.
Just as happiness is not a destination. People think if only I do this,
Right.
if I lose £10, I'll be happy. If I get $50,000 a year more, I'll be happy. If I move here, I'll be happy. If I get this new car, I'll be happy. And that is not how satisfaction and fulfillment work. They are a collection of moments of joy. So the trick is to think, how many moments of joy a day can I have?
Yeah.
Not what one thing is going to bring me happiness. And it's exactly the same in my work.
Yeah.
It's a collection of how can I be a better leader, founder, business person on a daily basis, not, well, if I make $1 million, I'm successful.
Absolutely. And that's always the carrot, right? That they're chasing, but they're ignoring just literally what's around them at that moment in time can't be present. I want to talk about your men's groups too. So thinking about the more prevalent topics, and obviously knowing that the show is called What Nobody Tells Us, I'm curious of the more prevalent topics that come up in your men's groups. And also, what are the things that men are now saying out loud that they have not been historically?
Let's have a bit of fun, Christy.
Mm.
Have a guess.
I would imagine fatherly relationships or relationships with parents are huge. I would imagine relationships with partners are huge. And I would imagine this is me going big with it. There's a bit of an existential crisis around what role they even have right now. And then I would also imagine there might be some like pity parties happening. Like, why is this happening to us? We should be in control. This isn't how it goes. And the why us, why me? Why can't they just listen? Why can't we just X? I would imagine it's along some of those spectrums. And then the last thing I will wager a guess on is I would hope, like our friend who introduced us, there are men and younger men, and I would hope even older men who are really trying to change how they show up for women and change how they show up for others and for themselves and their families, and really like create a new system for how this works and how they can contribute in a positive way, emotionally, physically, intellectually, all of it, spiritually. That's the other end of the pendulum. Okay. Those are my 5 guesses.
I would say it hasn't changed much in the 25 years that I've been doing this and the type of groups that I'm in.
How so?
It's the same stuff, and it's not most of what you said. we very rarely in my groups talk about masculinity and what being a man means.
I feel like you need those conversations. Like I want
I
them
I
to
just
happen.
I disagree, because I think what we talk about is how do you be a better version of yourself.
Mm,
And I think when you're trying to talk globally about how men should behave, it's going back to your statement of, well, this guy came in and he had a disposed notion of how I should be as a woman in business, and this was unfair.
yeah.
We just drop all of that. It's how do you be a better person? And from being a better person, the kind of labels of masculinity and femininity, they kind of dissolve,
Mm,
because there's just ways of being better humans, which is how do I relate to other people?
yeah.
What's my stuff that gets in the way? How do I communicate what I need? How do I listen to what somebody else needs?
Mhm.
And it doesn't really matter whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're in a relationship with a man or a woman. Um, we all need very similar things. And the communication styles might be different, and we might listen differently, and we might choose to do it in different ways. And some of that may be gendered and some of it may not.
Mhm.
However, we all just want to be loved. We all just want to be appreciated. And we all really want to be in some form of connection, or at least the large majority of us. I mean, there's some incredibly introverted people, but
Yeah.
they wouldn't come to a group. Um, the people that I see are focused on being better versions of themselves,
Mhm.
and the being a better man is a byproduct of being a better version of yourself. And sometimes we do, sometimes I'll say, what does masculinity mean to you? And when we have those conversations, it's completely different for each guy.
Of
And
course.
there's shared
Of course.
things, but there's no, we're always, I don't know if surprises me is kind of the right word, but what always kind of fills my bucket is when we have those discussions, there is no way to be a man. So when one of the reasons I want to get on podcasts and I want to talk about being a healthy man is because I believe the opposite is what I see in a lot of podcasts, and the kind of the Andrew Tate kind of generation is
Yeah.
there's only one way to be a man. And it's this very narrowly defined, misogynistic,
Yeah.
bully, who's a little boy, the
Mhm.
tyrant prince.
Yes.
That's the only way to be a man. And actually, in my experience, men show up to my groups with all kinds of different ways of being a man. We've
Mhm.
got stay at home fathers, we've got, you know, billionaire business leaders
Mhm.
in the same group.
Yeah.
They're
Incredible.
not talking about business, they're talking about how they get on with people, they're talking about what scares them, they're talking about how they communicate with each other better.
Yeah.
um, and that's where my focus is. And you do get other kinds of men's groups. You get the kind of groups where they get painted up and they go into the woods and kind of,
Mhm.
be warriors, and there's place for that. What I want from my group is people in my group are reasonably smart, reasonably high functioning cognitively, and
Mhm.
really want to work on what emotional intelligence is and what communication is and how they have a better experience for themselves, for their partners, for their kids. So they absolutely want to be better fathers, better husbands, better friends.
Mhm.
It's starting with they have to be better versions of themselves and understand themselves better to then be able to do that in community with other people. But yeah, there is not a lot of male whinging going on in my groups. Guys are not coming to my groups and going, this is unfair. It's so much easier for women. I'm not sure I can ever remember that being discussed in a group in the 25 years that I've been doing this.
That makes me so happy. I can't even tell you. Like it would be really just because there are, like you said, the Andrew Tates of, and for anyone who doesn't know who Andrew Tate is, he's the worst. He's a true misogynist, very violent, awful human being who puts out videos about how men should be. And he's been arrested. He's just awful in every possible way. But to know that like that faction exists, but the other faction exists with you, and you know it to be true, that people are stripping back every preconceived notion of whatever, and they want to start from scratch about how I can be a better human overall and how that impacts everyone around me, but starting with myself. I think that is such a beautiful notion that men are exploring. And also, whether a man or whether you're a woman, Every human should just explore that. It doesn't matter. There are horrible women out there, horrible men, but for whatever reasons, right? Like however they were raised, whatever they didn't get, whatever need they didn't get met as a child, or whatever trauma they experienced led them to be who they are today. But if they strip that back and just start to re-explore, God, I wish everyone would do that.
Yeah. I mean, if we strip out the true narcissists and the sociopaths, people that have extreme mental issues, the majority of people, and we're talking 90% ish,
Yeah.
they're just byproducts of their situation.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the love they got or didn't get as kids, depending on the
Yeah.
role modeling they got or didn't get, the messaging they got or didn't get is what you encounter in the world. I remember one of my friends was dating this girl, and this was a long, long time ago. We were young guys, and she said to me, she believes everybody is doing the best they can with what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And as a judgmental young man, I was like, no. As a wiser older man, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much my experience. It's their toolkit needs some help.
Yes.
So we can help people make their toolkit bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, they are less afraid. Therefore, they feel more confident. They feel more safe. And then they're able to relate to people and react and communicate with people in different ways.
Yeah. Just a few more questions, being conscious of our time, but what are some of the tools that you help share with people to get them started in this process?
Yeah, let me share some of my favorite tools. So there's one called Above and Below the Line. I got it from a company called the Conscious Leadership Group.
Mm-hmm.
So check out their work. They have a book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, that I get most of my leaders to read. It's a fabulous book. And this really fits in well with my kind of neurological way of looking at the world, which is we will have some kind of stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have some kind of reaction to the stimulus. So let's take something simple. You're driving along the road, somebody cuts you up. There's various ways you can react to that. You can flip them the bird, you can swear at them, you can get angry. All understandable, because in the moment you have felt fear because you believe that they have tried to kill you. And that's what your animal part of your brain, the emotional childlike part of your brain is going, you just try to kill me.
Yes.
And then what we want you to do is to take that, let that happen and go, okay, and then get curious and go, well, how would I like to be instead? So that initial reaction is the below the line reaction. This is our below the line behavior. And then we're looking to move. How can I move above the line? And often it's with curiosity. Oh, I noticed that response. Oh, I noticed I got afraid. And I noticed when I get afraid, I get angry, because that protects us, right? We feel fear. No, I need to fight or I need to run away. That needs some adrenaline. That needs some aggression and anger often.
Yeah.
So then we go, okay, well, now how would I like to be instead? Well, I want to be curious. I wonder what's going on for that person.
Right.
Are they late for an important meeting? Is their wife next to them, like just about to have a baby, and they're trying to get to the hospital as fast as they can?
Right.
Have they just split up with someone and having an awful day and they can't even be aware of the world around them?
Yeah.
How can I show compassion and empathy for what experience that human might be going through? Because the chances are that they deliberately cut me up are actually fairly small. Most people don't walk around the world deliberately trying to cause harm to others. It's a byproduct of misattention. It's not the aim.
Right.
When I can get to that place, I can just let it go and go, okay, off you go on your way. And you can apply this to every situation. Another great one is you get a text from somebody that says, we need to talk. Mm-hmm. Now, before people have done their work, usually the response when I say is, you get this text, how do you feel? Oh no, what have I done wrong? Oh no, what are they going to say to me?
Yes, the panic. Yep.
The panic, right? When somebody texts me and says we need to talk, I'm like, oh, cool, what are we going to talk about? Right? I get
like
excited.
One of 5 people who feels that way. I
get excited because now I know, one history has taught me that most of the time people just want support or help or to vent something. It's very rarely something I've done. I mean, it can be, and I have. I've definitely messed up in the past and said things I regret or, I've upset people. But even that, because of the skill set I have now, I'm comfortable that even if I have upset somebody or I've said something that somebody's taken the wrong way, or I've been rude, not on them misunderstanding, on me and my delivery, I can tidy it up and I can take responsibility and go, oh, okay, I see I hurt you there. That wasn't in my intention. How do we repair that? What do you need from me now? I have that skill set. And going back to the fear earlier, when you have that skill set, life is a lot less threatening and frightening because you're like, I think I'll be okay, and I think they'll be okay.
Yeah.
And even if we're not going to be friends anymore, which is very rare to happen. But even if
Right.
that happened, I'm going to be okay because I have plenty of friends. I have lots of good connections in the
Yeah.
world.
And you
And if it's
try
not
your
meant to be,
best to
it's
do
not
it.
meant to be, right?
Yeah.
And I get, especially in a workplace environment, oh, I'm going to get fired. I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you now, most of the times that happens, you are not going to get fired.
Mm-hmm.
Usually somebody just wants something from you, or they're checking that you've done so. It's
Yes.
we aren't very good as human beings of taking this initial data and making rational choices with it.
Right.
We can often build up something to be much more than it is because it serves us to be afraid of the unknown. That's
Okay.
what kept the human species alive,
Yes.
because we were afraid of the unknown. We were afraid of jumping off of cliffs because, hey, something bad might happen. We're afraid of running into open plains because something might come out and eat us.
Right.
So that is a huge survival mechanism. The world is not as dangerous, nowhere near as dangerous, yet we react as if it was. So it's getting past that initial reaction. So that comes back to that above and below the line.
Yep.
Initial reaction. Now, how do I move to where I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to share one more that I really like, which is a 9-box exercise.
Mm.
And that is to draw a 3x3 grid, and you're going to put your life into 9 boxes, and you're going to put a title in each box.
Yeah.
So that might be relationship, that might be career, that might be family, that might be hobbies. And your point is to fill all 9 boxes with something and then get into the detail. What do I want from my relationship? Then what do I need to do to get that from my relationship? So you are creating a roadmap for your life. And you're doing for your life what I would have done as a sports coach for an athlete. We would have dissected everything they're doing. Right, what's your diet like? What's your
Yes.
position like on the bike? How's the training going in the gym? What do we need to do there? What's the targets we need to have? How's the training going on the bike? How's
Mm-hmm.
your emotional approach? How's your tactical approach? And
Yeah.
we're doing the same thing for our lives as a human being. And then each individual box, we turn that into a page. Right now, let's really flesh that out. What are you looking to achieve here? And
Mm-hmm.
you're just making yourself a lot more conscious about your life, and then also a lot more intention about, how do I want to live, and how would I like to create what I want? And you need intentionality for that. You can't
Yeah.
just sit there and go, oh, life will just turn out okay. It doesn't tend to if you don't put some intention into it, and you don't have some kind of plan and goal and some kind of way of tracking how you're doing that. So we tend to look at that, maybe on a quarterly basis and check in. And
Mm-hmm.
I started go-kart racing during the pandemic
Mm.
because my sport, the velodrome, was closed. I couldn't do track cycling anymore.
Mm.
I'm not a good human being if I don't have some competition. Then I will be that guy in the free ride cutting everybody up, because I need to find some speed, and I need to have something. So I looked at that box, the competition box, and it was a cycling box, and then it turned into a competition box. And then it was like, what can I do? And the go-kart track was outdoors and open, and I went and tried it. I started go-kart racing
Love it.
because I needed an outlet for competition. So I need to exercise that part of me.
Yeah. Last question. How do you prevent people or help people from getting overwhelmed? Because thinking about that 9-step process, each of those boxes represents a significant part of their life that requires a significant amount of attention and work. And obviously none of these things change overnight. It takes a long time. So ideally, people would just choose one, take their time, and not put immense pressure on themselves to get it right now. But that's kind of another thing. Like you said, humans immediately get fearful, saves our life, but we also put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do things and figure things out. So how do you prevent people or help them from not getting overwhelmed when they see all these things they want to change and improve, but then it's like you get paralyzed?
List writing is usually a really good way to do it.
Mm.
So the first thing
Yeah.
is to dump everything that's overwhelming you into a list, and then start making some priorities.
Yeah.
And the stuff that's not high priority, you just put that to one side. That doesn't need to be dealt with now. I like systems like Asana or something like that, where you can hide the lower priority stuff. So you can only see the stuff that needs to be done today. So you can look at your list and go, right, what do I need to do today?
Mm-hmm.
Forward the rest of the stuff for a month, 6 months, a year. Like, it doesn't all need to be done now.
Yeah.
And just the process of writing things down or verbalizing them to me as a coach, or to your friends, or to your partner, number one, that helps your brain organize them. So There's just some psychology around when we're feeling very emotive, so overwhelmed, frustrated, afraid. We're storing that in one part of our brain. We're ruminating around and staying in that part of our brain. When we
Yeah.
write it down or we speak it aloud, the cognitive part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, actually hears that and then goes, "Oh, it's not as stressful as I thought. Oh, this is achievable. And now I can start to put plans into how to achieve it." So then we're
Oh,
moving it from this thing that's running around and is super stressful. And, when you're having those kind of half awake, half asleep dreams and you're really going
yeah.
through the stress, or you wake up and you've got all these things on your mind, writing it down is a super useful tactic.
Mhm.
Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yes, go for
Okay.
it. You should have
So
done that an hour ago.
yeah, I'm British. It's just part of my normal language. But um, I use something, I deliberately use a swear word in this title because I
Mm.
really want people to get this. I use something my clients called a fuck it diary,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Love it.
this is for you to write down all of the things that are stressing you, the bad situations, that somebody said something to you you didn't like. You write it all in there, and then it's like you toss it to one side and you say fuck it.
Yeah.
So it's that place to kind of store all of that. And it moves it from a emotive part of our brain to the cognitive prefrontal cortex, which looks at it much more rationally and goes, "Oh, it's not as big a deal as I thought." I'm going to throw my wife under the bus. We went to the dog park this morning. We're on the way there, and she said, "Oh God, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was overwhelmed. I've got all these things, and you know, I help her with that. That's something I'm good at, is helping with people when they're overwhelmed." And
Mhm.
so what we've installed is that she then gets up and she writes it down.
Yeah.
And then she wrote it down, and she woke up in the morning and realized that almost none of it really mattered. Like
Right.
in the middle of the night, she's building it up so much, and she wakes up in the morning, she's like, "Oh, it's really not that difficult." So it's knowing that we have these different parts of our brain. And just because one part of our brain is a light and
Yes.
feeling a lot, it doesn't mean that that's actually reality. That's just how we are relating to the world in this moment. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we will always relate to the world in that way. And then we have techniques and tactics to help us progress through that quicker.
Yeah.
So that's why therapy and coaching, part of why they work, is because we get to vent.
Yeah.
Venting is incredibly useful for humans. And there's a distinction between venting and gossiping. So
Right.
venting
Okay.
is, I'm going to talk about this situation,
Mhm.
I'm going to explain it so I can hear it myself. And people miss the importance of hearing it yourself,
Yeah.
because that moves it from the emotive part to the executive function adult part of our brain. And then as long as we're not co-opting other people in it, "Oh, do you agree? Oh, do
Yeah.
they do that to you?" We're not gossiping, we're just venting. It's super useful to have that space to do that.
Yeah. I want people to literally write that down. Like get a post-it, put it on in your mirror when you wake up in the morning, like literally write it down or speak it aloud just as a reminder, because that's such a simple but wildly powerful technique to just, I think of Inside Out 2 is coming out this weekend, and we have an almost 8-year-old daughter. So it's a big moment in our house, but I think about fear, and I think about fear. Oh my God, panicking and anxiety is coming in the picture. And it's like, if they're just in this little cage in that part of your brain and with no exit, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, right? But if you write it down or speak it aloud, you're literally changing the physiology and the cognitive response to it.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I
I've got
love
a
that.
34-year-old wife, and Inside Out is going to be a big part of our household too. She's speaking about it every day. She cannot wait. Um, and just a little bit of psychology about kids. Part of the reason that emotions get so big for them is because they don't have the prefrontal cortex developed to the level
Yeah.
that they can vent that. And then the prefrontal cortex goes, "Here's reality.
Right. Right.
Like, actually, here's what's going to happen. And here's the choices we have. And here's what we can do." So,
Yeah.
of course, things feel bigger to them, a life ending to them. And,
Sure.
arguments with their classmates feel life ending because to them they are, because they can't
Yes.
rationalize it in the same way as we can as an adult.
Of course. I mean, and this is also, I had a whole episode on this too, but it's like why reparenting yourself while parenting your child is literally the most difficult part of parenting. That is it. Because all of these things that you're talking about, you add in the notion of a child and raising a child. And it's like, oh my God, how do you actually get this done? And how do we not freak out and then start to get activated ourselves again, right? But again, they can go listen to that other podcast. But I just want to say thank you so much, because everything that you have shared, there's so many practical tips, but like you said, everything's grounded in neuroscience and physiological, and it's cognitive, and it's all, you can prove all of it. And it relates to every single one of us as a human. And the thing that I think is so funny about people is like, everyone thinks that they're like immune to XYZ. And it's like, we're not. We're all literally the same. We're these tiny little humans walking around this giant earth, all dealing with the same shit to certain degrees. And if you strip it away and just kind of start from the beginning and get curious about yourself, to all the brilliant, advice that you've given, you can make such an impact on your own life and therefore others. Just thank you so much for sharing everything.
We just want to be loved. We just want to be appreciated. Yeah. We want to be part of the tribe. Like being part of community is super important for humans, because if we weren't, back in the dawn of human history, you died if you weren't part of the community, because the community working together is what kept us safe. So being out of community is incredibly stressful for human beings.
Sure.
And I really liked what you said there. Yes, globally, we're very, very similar. We all have our own individual story, and we tend to make our story, or more of our story than it is. Mm-hmm. So the last thing I'm going to leave you is one of the things I love about doing groups, and I do various groups. I do the men's groups. Yeah. I do executive groups for companies that are in the companies. I said I'm just about to start doing a group for people from different companies. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love most about groups is somebody will share something thinking they are the only person experiencing this thing.
Yes.
And I'll stop them and I'll just say, anybody else been through this, or can anybody else relate to this? And all the hands will go up in a room, or the majority of the hands will go up in a room, and people will go, yes. And then immediately feel, I'm not alone. I'm part of something bigger than me, which is really important. To know that we are part of something bigger than ourselves is humbling, but it also makes us feel connected to our experience as human beings, which I think just brings so much more color to the world, and it helps us be more compassionate and empathetic. Because if we continue around people and go, oh, they've been through what we've been through, you immediately feel closer to them.
Yeah. Where can people find you, Lee, if they wanted to reach out and learn more?
Yeah, thank you. I'm super easy to find. LeePovey.com. Just Google Lee Povey. I come up first on Google. My last name is luckily unique enough, Povey, that you will find me. I'm pretty easy to find. I'd love to speak to you. Obviously, if you're a founder, you have a company, I'd love to speak to you. And if you want some support, great. And also, if you want to be in a men's group, I've got a couple of spaces at the moment in my men's group. Come speak to me. We'd love to get you in there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been just an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. You asked some wonderful questions, which always makes this experience so much more fun. It feels so engaged, and I really enjoyed just having a fun conversation with you. Thank you, Christy.
Of course. Thank you. Well, that's it. Another episode of What Nobody Tells Us. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you felt something. I hope you learned something. And I hope you feel empowered to go reach out to somebody who might be going through something you don't understand. Lean in, ask the questions, make the connection, be the friend who starts the conversation. I can't tell you how much it will mean to someone. If you have ideas for further topics, please reach out to me. I love hearing from you. Your emails and your tweets and your texts and your Instagram DMs are so welcome and so amazing. If you want to hear more, every episode is available on my website, christiebishop.com. That's Christiebishop.com. You can find all previous episodes, and you can also book me for speaking engagements, for training, coaching, and marketing consulting. I've only been doing that for the last 20 plus years. It's one of my first loves. So again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Christy Bishop, and this is What Nobody Tells Us.